Not because he failed, not because he lost a battle, but because the alliance itself was beginning to crack under the weight of his personality. That decision made quietly, deliberately, would shape Operation Market Garden, doom 8,000 men at Arnhem, and nearly tear the Allied coalition apart during the Battle of the Bulge. 80 years later, historians still argue about it because both sides were partly right. This is the story of why Eisenhower took command away from Montgomery at the height of the war. August 23, 1944, northern France. Montgomery sat inside his mobile headquarters, a command caravan surrounded by maps, reports, and cigarette smoke. Paris had just been liberated. German forces were retreating in disorder. The end of the war seemed visible, almost close enough to touch. Officially, Montgomery commanded the 21st Army Group, all British and Canadian forces in Northwest Europe. But temporarily, he held something more important. Eisenhower had given him authority over all Allied ground forces during the Normandy invasion. At the time, it made perfect sense. One front, one commander, one set of decisions. But Normandy was over. Now the front stretched more than 400 miles. American forces under General Omar Bradley alone numbered over 1 million men. Montgomery's British and Canadian troops totaled around 400,000. The balance had shifted and everyone could feel it. The Americans outnumbered Montgomery's forces more than 2-1. And the Americans were growing restless. General Omar Bradley was calm, methodical, deeply respected by his soldiers. He was commanding more men than any other Allied general in Europe, yet he still reported to Montgomery. What had made sense in June now felt humiliating in August. Bradley didn't complain publicly. He did something more dangerous. He called Eisenhower. The message was clear. The command structure no longer matched reality. Bradley proposed a solution Eisenhower had already been considering. Eisenhower himself should take direct control of Allied ground operations. Montgomery would return to leading the 21st Army Group. Bradley would command the 12th Army Group. Both would report directly to Eisenhower. Militarily, it was logical. Politically, it was explosive. Because Montgomery wouldn't just lose authority. He would lose prestige. And Eisenhower knew no one cared more about prestige than Bernard Montgomery. The question was no longer about tactics. It was about whether the Allied coalition could survive its own success. Eisenhower knew exactly how this would go. Montgomery would argue. He would protest. He would appeal to Churchill. And he would turn a military decision into a political crisis. But Eisenhower also knew something else. The command structure that worked during Normandy was no longer working in September. So he made the call. Montgomery answered, already defensive. He could hear it in Eisenhower's voice. This was about command, and Montgomery knew what Eisenhower was going to say before he said it. Eisenhower explained calmly, the front was too wide. Centralized ground command was no longer practical. He needed to take direct control himself. Montgomery reacted instantly. Eisenhower was in Versailles, hundreds of miles from the fighting. You couldn't command ground operations from that distance. Eisenhower said he would move his headquarters forward. Montgomery dismissed it. That wasn't the issue. Ground warfare required unified command, one mind making tactical decisions. Split authority would lead to arguments, delays, confusion. Eisenhower chose his words carefully. American forces outnumbered British forces 2-1, and that gap was only going to grow. Politically, the larger force could not remain subordinate to the smaller one. Montgomery accused Eisenhower of prioritizing politics over victory. Eisenhower responded with brutal honesty. Without the coalition, there would be no victory. Montgomery understood what was happening now. Eisenhower was willing to sacrifice what Montgomery believed was military effectiveness in order to preserve political unity. Eisenhower ended the debate. Effective September 1st, he would take direct command of Allied ground forces. Montgomery would command 21st Army Group. Bradley would command 12th Army Group. Both would report to Eisenhower. Montgomery said he needed to consult the Prime Minister and ended the call. But he didn't just consult Churchill. That same afternoon, Montgomery bypassed Eisenhower entirely. He sent a message directly to the British Chiefs of Staff in London. He framed Eisenhower's decision as a threat to British influence. He warned that American dominance in command would lead to American dominance in post-war Europe. This was exactly what Eisenhower had feared. By evening, Winston Churchill was on the phone. Churchill's tone was diplomatic but firm. He understood Eisenhower's logic, but he needed to know something critical. Was this decision about operational necessity or about American power? Eisenhower answered honestly, it was both. The front had widened. Centralized command was harder. And American forces were now the dominant element of the alliance. Churchill was silent for a moment. Then he said he supported Eisenhower's decision. He would speak to Montgomery personally. That call was brief and final. Montgomery needed to accept the decision gracefully. Fighting it would damage the alliance. And if he fought, he would lose. Montgomery knew Churchill was right. But accepting it meant admitting something he hated. That the war was becoming American. And that his own power was fading. Montgomery sent Eisenhower a formal message. Professional. Polite. Accepting the new command structure while making sure everyone knew he believed it was a mistake. Eisenhower recognized it immediately. Agreement under protest. The change took effect September 1, 1944. Within 72 hours, Montgomery would prove exactly why Eisenhower had taken his authority away. September 4th. Montgomery sent Eisenhower a proposal with a name that promised everything. Operation Market Garden. 3 airborne divisions dropped deep behind German lines in Holland. Bridges seized across multiple rivers. A narrow corridor punched straight into Germany's industrial heartland. If it worked, Montgomery claimed, the war could end by Christmas. It was bold, risky, dependent on perfect execution, and it was presented as the plan that would vindicate Montgomery's entire philosophy of war. Under the old command structure, Montgomery wouldn't have asked. He would have ordered it. Resources would have been allocated. Bradley would have complied. But now, Eisenhower had to approve. Bradley opposed the plan immediately. It put everything into one gamble. Patton was even harsher. He said it would fail and that resources were being wasted while real opportunities existed in the South. This was precisely why the command change had been necessary. Eisenhower approved Market Garden but not exclusively. He also supported Bradley's southern operations. Montgomery was furious. Dividing resources, he argued, meant neither operation would succeed. He sent Eisenhower a long message insisting that concentrating everything in the North was the only way to end the war quickly. Eisenhower's reply was calm and immovable. Montgomery had what he needed for Market Garden. But Eisenhower would not strip other armies to serve one man's plan. The alliance would not accept it. Montgomery replied that Eisenhower had doomed the operation to failure. September 17th. Market Garden launched. Eisenhower watched and hoped Montgomery was right. By September 20th, hope was fading. British airborne troops at Arnhem were surrounded. German resistance was stronger than expected. The advance was slowing. Eisenhower called Montgomery, asked if adjustments were needed. Montgomery refused. The plan would work, he insisted. They just needed to push harder. Casualties were mounting. Montgomery said casualties were part of war. Withdrawing now would make the losses meaningless. This was his fatal flaw. Once committed, he could not adapt. By September 25th, Market Garden had failed completely. 8,000 Allied casualties. Arnhem lost. The bridge never taken. Montgomery blamed insufficient resources. Eisenhower saw something else. Proof. Market Garden's failure didn't end the argument, it settled it. Montgomery's message blaming Eisenhower confirmed everything the Supreme Commander feared. Montgomery could not accept responsibility, could not balance his vision against coalition reality. 3 months later, he proved it again. December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. German forces smashed through American lines. Eisenhower temporarily placed Montgomery in command of American units north of the penetration. It was a matter of geography, not trust. Montgomery saw it as vindication. Then he made a catastrophic mistake. He held a press conference. He claimed credit for stabilizing the front, implied American commanders had panicked, suggested British leadership had saved the situation. American generals were furious. Bradley threatened to resign. Patton demanded Montgomery be fired. The alliance nearly fractured. Eisenhower was forced into damage control, privately threatening Montgomery, publicly defending him to preserve British confidence. This was exactly what Eisenhower had feared back in September. That Montgomery's personality would create crises no victory could offset. Post-war historians largely sided with Eisenhower. Max Hastings concluded that Montgomery's strategy might have ended the war sooner, but only under perfect conditions. Eisenhower's broad front approach guaranteed victory even when plans failed. General George Marshall was even more blunt. Taking command away from Montgomery prevented the Allied coalition from breaking apart. Montgomery never accepted that judgment. Until his death, he believed Eisenhower had been wrong. That the war could have ended by Christmas. That politics had ruined military brilliance. He was partly right. But Eisenhower understood something Montgomery never did. Winning a coalition war isn't about being right. It's about keeping imperfect allies working together long enough to win. And that is why Eisenhower took command away from Montgomery.